Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this question and answer session. I'm Graham Stallwood. I am the Planning Inspectorate's Director of Operations. So what that really means is that all of the inspectors, all of our case officers, our case managers, our planning officers, our environmental specialists, and all the other people that do the frontline work for our customers all report through in the Operations Directorate to me. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope you find it a useful session. It's an opportunity really for anyone who's interested in becoming a planning inspector to hear a little bit more about the organisation, to hear from some real life living, breathing inspectors, hear from them personally about their own experiences and how they find the work and the organisation. No question is daft, so at the end there is a session where we can give you an opportunity to ask some questions of us. So please do ask your question. As I say, no question is daft. You can guarantee that somebody else is probably thinking the same thing. So please ask away and we'll do our best to help you. The only other thing I would add before we go into the session is that this is only the second time we've done this. The first time we did it was earlier this week. So please do give us some feedback. Tell us how you found it. Tell us if there's things that you would find it helpful for us to cover in our future session, and we'll see if we can do that. The session earlier this week went very well. We got some useful information, and the people there found it helpful. But the more helpful we can make it to you for you, the better. So that's enough from me for now. We've got some colleagues on the call as well who are going to introduce some slides to you, and then we'll take some questions. So I'm going to hand over to Funke. Here she is, and she will lead you through the first set of slides.
Thank you, Graham. Good afternoon, everyone. And my name is Funke Idisha. I'm an operations lead, and I manage the trainers who train, mentor, and coach our Band 1 inspectors. So a brief run through of how today will run. So we will be making a short presentation where we will talk to you about the Planning Inspectorate, what we do, what our values are. We will talk to you also about the role of being a Band 1 inspector, and then you will also have the opportunity of hearing from our inspectors firsthand what their experiences are, what they enjoy about the role, and whatever challenges the role places before them. Then we'll move on to question and answers, where we will take your questions and provide you with some answers. We want to encourage you to pop your questions through the Q&A panel within Microsoft Teams. And you can also opt to keep your questions anonymous by checking the checkbox, and we will respond to all questions during the Q&A session. So I will be talking to you about our organization, the Planning Inspectorate. So what we do. So within the Inspectorate, we deal with a wide range of issues ranging from planning appeals to more specialist casework across England. We contribute to the creation of great places by enabling the build of new homes and communities where people want to live or even work. We enable the independent consideration for national infrastructure and the putting in place of local plans. We also enable the natural and historic environment to be conserved and enhanced. So we are a value-adding organization, and we do make a difference. So I'll hand you over now to Rebecca, who will talk about our values.
Okay. Thank you, Funke. Hello, my name is Rebecca Phillips, and I'm the professional lead for planning appeals, which includes providing professional support and advice, as well as training and development for inspectors undertaking planning appeals. So a little bit about our values. So they're intrinsic to all the decisions that we make. We're fair when it comes to listening to different views, open in the way that we work, and impartial in examinations, applications, and our appeals. So a little bit about the role of the inspector, if we can go on to the next slide. That's great, thank you. So in terms of our role, well, more widely, we are very involved in delivering ambitious government policy changes, supporting economic growth, the Levelling Up agenda, balancing that with listening, considering and balancing the needs of people, buildings and the places that we inhabit, as well as the wider environment. And there are a lot of opportunities within what we do in terms of our work. So, for example, Funke talked about the areas that we are involved in. And there are opportunities, obviously, once you've gone through the training to work in different areas. So Graham's going to pick up a little bit about that, later on about the roles. But essentially, we've got work in enforcement, examining local plans, national infrastructure projects, and we've also got other areas too, such as compulsory purchase orders, as well as some of the more specialist casework in environmental matters, high hedges, etc. So there's varied opportunities in the inspectorate to deal with lots of different types of cases. Okay, thank you. I'm going to pass back to Funke now.
So I'll be talking to you about this opportunity, and in this campaign we have 15 vacancies which we would like to fill, and the role is predominantly home-based with some level of travel, so it would allow you the flexibility of managing your time while working from home. And we're also an inclusive organization, so we allow part-time or accommodate part-time working and full-time working. Some people even work, school, school term, and have their holiday off. So we're very accommodating when it comes to the pattern of working, and the salary structure is you will start on a salary of 41,835. Pardon me. We have a representative of HR who is here, who will be talking about how you'll progress, across the salary range, which will be coming later on within our presentation. So we have a general civil service pension. We accommodate flexible working, like I've said previously, and we also have childcare vouchers and much more, which has already been covered within the advert. And if you have any further questions regarding that, you can ask us in the Q&A session, and we'll be happy to take on your questions. So I'll pass you on now to Graham, who will talk more about the opportunity.
Thank you. So back to me. So I'm a planner by background, as are some of the others on this call, but you do not need to be a planner to become an inspector. And we have a range of professions represented in our inspector workforce. So some of them are on the screen there in front of you, people like engineers, like lawyers, architects, heritage specialists, we have ecologists, noise experts, we have surveyors, we have all sorts of professions represented in our workforce, and that represents the range of work we have and the range of skills that we need in order to do our work and make planning decisions in the 21st century. So this is a list of some of the skills that we're looking for, some of the experience we're looking for. There's a full list in the job pack, but these are some of those that are worth probably pulling out. So we do need to have applicants who have full or chartered membership of a relevant professional body. So like I say, that could be, that's not just Royal Town Planning Institute for planners, it could be ROBA for if you're an architect, or it could be RICS if you're a surveyor, or the Institute of Public Rights of Way if you're a rights of way specialist, or various other bodies. But please do take a look at the list that's in the job pack, provide more information. And importantly, we're not expecting to find oven-ready decision makers who have all of the ability to write a perfect appeal decision from day one. We're looking more in terms of your ability to analyze the information, how you interpret it, how you can apply, and the other kind of skills that are in there. Being able to write a clear, accurate and concise decision, but we don't expect you to be able to write a planning inspectorate decision on day one. We will support you through that process. Importantly, at the bottom, a willingness to travel widely for events is, you do need to recognise that is part of the role. So please do take that into account when you're deciding whether to apply, and maybe we can have some questions about that and what that means in practice when we get on to the question and answer session. Training is a really important part of the role. So any of you who have known colleagues or former colleagues that have come to join us have probably heard about the amount of time and effort and commitment we put into the training of our inspectors and supporting them in their work. Again, you may wish to ask some of the inspectors who are on the call today questions about that. If you're appointed, you'll start off your time with us with a comprehensive 2-week induction based out of Bristol, where you'll receive the basics that help you go to do the job from when you finish the training sessions. We'll then support you through the training sessions, through your first year with a group of other people who are going through a similar process as you. So you can build a real bond with the people who you're training with, and you'll be supported, coached, and mentored by an inspector who is experienced and is able to train and support you. And we have some of those trainers on the call today, so again, they can tell you a little bit more about that if you're interested. And then once you've finished your training and you're out doing real casework, if you want to learn about new areas of casework that you haven't done before, then you could, or indeed ones that you have done before but you want to learn more about, we will provide further training on those specialisms. Say, for example, if you want to do enforcement work, or you're going to do work on tree preservation order cases, or if you're going to go and work on national infrastructure. Or indeed, if you're about to start work on things like hearings or inquiries, we will support you with the training to allow you to build up your skills and confidence to go and do that work. And throughout the year, we provide regular learning opportunities, whether that's through lunch and learns or specific updates in person around particular areas of training need. And then once a year, we do all get together as an organisation as well in March this year. Which everyone gets together and not only does some learning but also does other work together around the organisation. So I think I'm going to hand over to Esther. Is that right? And Esther's going to cover a bit about the recruitment process.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Esther Hughes and I'm looking after the recruitment team. Just to give you a bit of a breakdown on how the campaign timeframes work. So the applications close on the 8th of February and we will be conducting the shortlisting exercise on the 9th of February. And then from the 10th, we will be sending out written tests to shortlisted candidates. It's worth bearing in mind there will be a sort of submission cut-off date for those, so if you can please make sure that you do get your written tests back in time, because we probably won't be able to accept applications that come back after that point. We will be advising candidates of interview dates early March, so that will give you plenty of time to arrange any meetings that you need to arrange to be able to attend the interview. Those will be on Teams, so quite flexible. Job offers will be coming out to people between the 5th and 6th of April, with the first intake date of the 5th of June and the second intake on the 17th of July. One thing to point out is that these start dates are fixed as you are brought in groups to be able to support each other and make best use of that sort of coordinated approach. So you can, when the job offer does come out to you, you can view that as a firm offer, and we would sort of encourage you to put in your notice at that point, because obviously we can't move around the start dates. So hopefully that explains our process, and obviously any other questions I'll be able to answer later on. I think we're moving on to the videos now.
My background's largely as a policy planner for both local authorities and at a regional level. I've also worked in the university sector on research projects and for a large water company.
I was previously an Associate Director at Lichfield's Planning Consultancy, and I'd worked there for about 10 years. So making the change to the Planning Inspectorate was a very big step for me, but one that I'm very glad to have made.
Before I became an inspector, I was a local government planning policy officer. I wanted to join the Planning Inspectorate because one of the things I most enjoy about working in planning is taking on a new issue or a new site, really understanding it and reaching a view about what would be the best outcome. And the work of the Inspectorate allows you to do a lot of that and also to see it through to a clear conclusion, which is very satisfying.
I wanted to become an inspector to challenge myself, to bring together all the experience I've had from across the years, and to work independently, working more in a pure planning role after years of working in management positions.
There were several reasons why I wanted to become an inspector, but in particular, the level of independence you have in managing your workload and determining cases was particularly attractive. I find the best thing about the role is that the work is very mentally stimulating. I also really enjoy seeing completely different parts of the country, especially when the sun's out.
One of the best things about the role for me is the travelling. Having spent quite a number of years working in one particular area, it's good to spread my wings a bit, see some different areas and some different types of development, get into the city, into the countryside and everywhere in between.
The best thing about the role is the professionalism. You're working amongst a huge range of professionals from all different backgrounds, and you're valued for the professional that you are and for the experience that you can bring to the role. I have the best work-life balance that I've ever had in a role. I'm very much trusted to manage my workload across the week, so if I need to do something for myself or different during the day, I feel like I can do that without having to explain to anyone. This is a perfect role for people with busy family lives.
I have a young family, and the work-life balance that the Planning Inspectorate allows me to have is really fantastic. Being able to schedule my workload around simple things like the school run or my children's various activities is very valuable to me.
I'm finding that the work-life balance is pretty good. There's lots of flexibility about how you organise your time as long as the work's getting done. So when you're working pretty hard, but it's very feasible to plan around family commitments and other things that are going on. I work part-time and it's good to be part of an organisation that is geared up for part-time working and has realistic expectations about how that operates in practice. The initial training is really good quality and it's well designed to help people from different backgrounds build on what they already know and get up to speed with some of the things they haven't handled before. It's a long-term training process and it's fair to say there's quite a lot of scrutiny, so you need to be prepared to learn and prepared to take advice. But there's also a lot of support from managers and from your peer group, and it feels like a very constructive process.
The training when I joined was thorough, engaging and very insightful. At times it was intense, but you share the experience with a group of other new inspectors, who for me have become friends that I remain in touch with regularly.
The training when I first started was 2 weeks in Bristol, which was very intense, but well structured, and the trainers are really understanding and know that everyone's coming from a different place of knowledge. We were encouraged to socialise as a training cohort, and that's really a key feature at PINS, building relationships with your peers, so that even though you work alone at home, you're surrounded by colleagues who are in the same boat as you. We all support each other, there's no office politics, and everyone wants to see everyone succeed, which is amazing. To anyone considering becoming an inspector, I would just say go for it. The first year is intense as you get to grips with the role, but you'll learn so much about planning and be supported by great professionals.
To anyone that's thinking of becoming an inspector, I'd say the work is all about weighing up the evidence and reaching a decision. So with that in mind, do have a really good look at all the information about what's involved and think about whether it's for you. But if it does sound like it's for you, I would 100% say go for it.
To anyone thinking of becoming an inspector, I would say provided you enjoy writing and making decisions, it will offer you a very engaging career and the opportunity to have a very good work-life balance.
Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Bev Wilders. I'm a planning inspector and I'm currently also a seconded inspector trainer. So I'll be chairing the Q&A session. As we said previously, all the people that have done the presentation of the slides are here on the call. And we've also got two of the inspectors who are in the video, Claire and Jane, on the call too. So any questions that you have, if you post them into the Q&A session, then we'll work through those. So I'll start to work through this now. So I'll call on some of the other presenters just to chip in as and when if there's particular questions that they need to answer. So the first question that we had, I think, was with regard to membership of the RTPI, which I think Graham's provided a written response to on the chat there. And then we also had a question with regard to the availability of the presentations, which again, I think Pete's done a response to that. So I think they can be made available if required. And then we've had a question to ask whether the inspectors in the video are Band 1 inspectors. So I don't know whether Jane or Claire want to chip in at this point and explain your current sort of position within the inspectorate, just to explain your role at the moment.
Sure, shall I go first? So
Yep.
I'm Jane. I joined the inspectorate in June last year. So I am a Band 1 inspector, but I'm about halfway through the inspector training process. So we're known as inspectors in training, and I'm about halfway through that process. Claire?
Hi, I'm Claire Megginson. I started a year gone November with my Band 1 training, and so I've completed the full year of training, and I've gone through the progression framework, so I've completed all of that. I actually applied for another role late last year, so I've just recently been promoted to a Band 2 inspector, and I'm going through my training now, which started last week, for nationally significant infrastructure projects. So there are opportunities once you start with the inspectorate to progress to other levels. So that's where I'm at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Claire and Jane. And I think that's, obviously we were talking about before that, there are lots of opportunities within the inspectorate. And I think Claire's point is a case in point, isn't it? That very quickly you found that an opportunity has opened up that you've been able to go for. And that's in a different area of casework as well to what you were initially trained in. So yeah, all the inspectors in the video, I think Claire and I think Lewis has also very recently finished his training, are all kind of recently through the training process. So other inspectors on the call as myself, as I said, I'm currently working as a seconded inspector trainer, but I started 7.5 years ago, I think it was, as a Band 1 inspector. I'm now a Band 2 inspector, and during my time at PINS, I've done various specialist training. So I do heritage cases. I also deal with local plan examinations and also gypsy and traveller casework. So I don't know whether you want to come in at this point and just give a little bit of a background to what you've done since you've been with the inspectorate.
Yeah, hi there. I'm Andrew Dorr. I'm a seconded inspector trainer as well. Been in PINS coming up 10 years now. So I've been through the full range. I'm a Band 2 inspector, also through the range of appeals that I've been dealing with, and I've progressed into carrying out inquiries and hearings. And of late, I've been dealing with a lot of sort of quite significant major housing schemes, which is it's extremely sort of satisfying to be involved in schemes such as that, which have a big impact in terms of the provision of housing and the government's aims to boost housing supply and so on. So it's a great opportunity to have those sort of that sort of responsibility and involvement in those sort of cases. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. So yeah, so obviously, I think for most people we do start at a Band 1 level, but there is a question about whether all inspectors start at Band 1 or can you go straight to other bands. So I think Graham, you were going to come in at this point and answer that question.
Yeah, thank you. So it's a really good question. Most of our recruitments are direct into Band 1, and then we support our inspectors through into other bands if they're interested in that. We do sometimes do a Band 2 or Band 3 direct recruitment. So the Band 3 is our top tier inspector, Band 2 is the middle tier. We did one last autumn, But where we do those, they tend to be direct for particular types of work. So, for example, the Band 2, Band 3 exercise we did last year was to secure inspectors, particularly to deal with national infrastructure work and sometimes local plans, but particularly national infrastructure. And that's because we needed more people in direct into that area. So you won't, for example, see us recruiting probably direct into Band 2 or Band 3 to deal with, for example, appeals work. Most of those people would come in at Band 1 and then work through. And that's just to do with the nature of the work that we have and the supply of the skills that we have for the different types of work. So, but hopefully from what you heard from Claire, for example, gives some idea that actually if you've got the interest, enthusiasm, skills, capability, then there is the ability to get promoted relatively quickly if you're interested in it, and you know, it goes through a competitive interview process, just like most of you are probably used to from your current role. So you'd apply for it and you go through a similar process in terms of interview and assessment and so on. So I hope that helps. If you need to know any more, then please ask a further question and we'll see what we can do.
Thanks, Graham. So the next question relates to how much time would be spent away from home typically, and how far away from home would sites be? So I'll probably make a stab at answering this first, and then maybe if Jane and Claire, you want to chat, you know, give your kind of experience of that. So quite a lot of the inspectorate's work is in London in the southeast, and as Graham touched upon at the very beginning, in most cases there will be a requirement to travel at some point in your career as a planning inspector, but what's typical is very difficult to say, because obviously it can depend on where you live in the country, where the cases are. I mean, certainly from my experience of myself and also colleagues that I've managed, in most cases at Band 1 you will be dealing with predominantly written representation cases, so there are lots of those around. So the people that work out your programs of work will, where possible, try and plan casework that is as close to where you live as possible. And the reason for that is that obviously from a personal point of view, it's better for you, you're not travelling as far, but also in terms of the organisation, obviously that's a much more efficient way of working if we're sending people to places nearer to where they live. However, there will be some times when you do need to work a little bit further away from home, and in some of those cases you will need to stay overnight because of the length of travel that's involved. But we will be given lots of notice of that, so there's plenty of time to make arrangements in terms of home commitments, etc. And we will try and work with that as far as possible. So if you do have particular commitments, then obviously you need to speak to your manager about that, and we will try and accommodate that as far as we possibly can. But maybe if we hear from Jane and Claire in terms of their experience of how often they've had to travel in the time that they've been with us and staying away from home, etc., just to give a sort of recent experience of that.
Sure, shall I start? So I mean, it might be useful to start with what a typical week looks like. So I'm handling 100% written reps appeals at the moment, and I basically have a weekly cycle. So one day a week I'm out on site looking at the cases that are coming up, and the rest of the week I'm based at home writing those up and doing the preparation for the next lot. As Bev says, it does depend quite a lot where you're based, and I'm in the southeast and quite close to London. That does mean that I can obviously get into London quite easily, and also out into like basically all the counties south and east of London quite straightforwardly. I'd say generally I travel somewhere between an hour and a half to an hour to a case. Sometimes it's a lot less. I've had ones that are 20 minutes away. I've very occasionally had ones that are further. I've been here 8 months. I've only once needed to stay away overnight for somewhere that was about 3-hour drive away, and that was partly my choice because I just didn't really fancy doing that in the winter, so staying over felt more sensible. The other thing to say is within that week, or sometimes within a fortnight, if that's how you choose to organise it, you have a lot of choice about when you set up your site visits, which day. So if you have like a regular evening commitment or whatever, it's very feasible to work around that and make sure you're travelling when it's okay for you to travel. And generally, it's all within the working day. It might be a longish working day, but it's within the working day. Claire?
Thanks, Jane.
Hi, yeah, just building on what Jane said, I'm based up in the northeast of England, and there's a significant number of inspectors in the northeast looking for cases. So when I dealt with the Section 78 appeals, there are a lot of inspectors who like to travel to London and get the train down, do that maybe on a fortnightly basis, and sort of arrive one day, do half of your site visits, stay overnight, and do the other half the next day, then travel home. You can do that if you wish. I wasn't massively keen on going to London, to be fair, and I prefer to drive. So I've generally worked with my case officer, and they're really good in terms of accommodating the way in which you like to work. And I've built up a programme on a weekly basis, and generally up to sort of 2-hour drive away. Did a lot of work around Leeds, Harrogate, Selby area. In the sort of 9-10 months that I was doing site visits, I would say I only stayed away from home once, and that was my own choosing when I did a fortnightly programme in the Leicestershire area, and it was just a little bit too far away. So it is really flexible in terms of how you want to manage your cases across the weeks. And I think another thing to point out as well is some inspectors might have a second home somewhere else. We have a caravan over in the northwest near the Lake District, so my case officer knows that, so I can sometimes have cases over in the northwest and they know that I've got somewhere to stay there. So you can sort of move around the country if that suits you as well, in terms of cases.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, so I think, again, I think it demonstrates that there is a requirement to travel sometimes, as we've said, but as best we can, then we will try and accommodate your particular needs. I mean, just as another example, so I'm based in the northwest, so just as another case in point, so when I did my training, I did go to London quite a lot, but actually where I live, I'm within walking distance of a mainline station, so for me that wasn't problematic. So even sort of geographically it seemed like a long way, but in reality it was less than 2 hours to get into central London, so that was probably easier for me than being sat on the N62 trying to drive across to Leeds, for instance. So sometimes when you're used to working in one area, as Jane said in the video, it can seem a bit daunting thinking you're going to go all over the country, but actually that's one of the big positives of the job as well for most inspectors, that you get to see lots of part of the country that you otherwise wouldn't get to go to. So I think it can be a positive point as well. Okay, so the next, yep.
Oh, sorry. I've just
no, go on,
coming in on that as well. Obviously, yeah, if you were to obviously progressing into hearings, inquiries, and so on, then again, probably much more opportunities again to sort of travel around the country, because obviously you go where the inquiries or hearings are. But again, it's a very good opportunity to see the country. Obviously that would more likely to involve some nights away, but that's sort of in the future. But I think it's certainly, I see it as a positive in terms of getting around and seeing different places.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay, so the next question is around asking about if you want to focus on a particular area of casework. So they've given an example of development management or enforcement. Is that a possibility? So I'll kind of start answering this one, and then people just raise your hand if you want to chip in. But so in terms of the initial Band 1 inspector training, we cover a broad range of topics. So all inspectors that come in at Band 1 will cover a broad range of casework. So you will be trained in lots of different things. So whatever your specialism is, if you have one coming in, then you won't deal with that immediately, unless, as Graham said, there are some opportunities every now and again where we advertise for specific inspectors with specific experience. So you wouldn't specialise initially, you would do a broad range of casework. But once you've completed your initial training, then if you wanted to try and focus in a particular area of casework, so for example enforcement, then opportunities do arise periodically for you to put yourself forward for that training. Then you would be trained in enforcement casework, and then you would deal with that specifically, but that wouldn't be something that would happen during the initial sort of 12 to 18 month period in training. But certainly the opportunities are there to specialise if that's what you want to do. I don't know if anybody else wants to come in on that one before we move on to the next question. Okay, so there's now a question around part-time working. So it says, how does it work if you're part-time and training, and how much longer does it take? So I'll kind of start with this one, but I'm hoping Jane will be happy to come in at this point, because Jane is part-time and she has started part-time and has done her training on that basis. So I'm a part-time inspector, so I work part-time, and as Funky said, there's various different ways of working part-time at the inspectorate. So for me, I initially started doing term time only working, so that's what I started to do after a year or so of training, and then I now do a 4-day week plus I do term time only, so that's how it works for me. However, I did my training full-time, so as I said, I know the training is now available on a part-time basis, and that can take all kind of various shapes and forms. So I don't know whether, Jane, if you can maybe give us your experience of your part-time training program.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I work a 4-day week. The initial two weeks of training in Bristol and then the week after that were full-time, and it's probably worth flagging up that that basically does need to be full-time because you're meeting with a cohort and training live, so there's a certain amount of stuff that needs to be done. Ever since then, I've been working a 4-day week, and basically everything is adjusted pro rata, so my caseload is 80% of a full-time planning inspector's caseload. The number of cases is adjusted across the weeks to make sure that I'm handling a proportionate number of cases. So that's one thing to flag up, is that it's the first time I've worked part-time where I don't feel like I'm trying to do a full-time job in part-time hours. Things are adjusted accordingly, which is good. In terms of how long it takes for training, it's really hard to answer. It's a bit how long is a piece of string, because there are certain milestones that you have to meet, and those relate quite closely to how many cases you've done, how many cases you've done well, and certain topics that need to be covered. So there's a midpoint that people talk about being somewhere around halfway through the 12 to 18 month period ish, but it's quite hard to pin down when that would be. I've broadly just about managed to keep up with full-time colleagues in terms of progression, but that's not taken for granted at all, and it takes as long as it takes to some extent. Is that fair, Bev? I'm only talking from my experience.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And I think, yeah, I mean, inevitably, if you are working part-time during your training process, then as Jane said, it inevitably means you will get fewer cases, so you get fewer opportunities to kind of hit the targets. But I think I would just emphasize that, yeah, we do have a progression framework, but we do focus on the individual. So if someone is working part-time, then we look at a broader range of things in terms of assessing someone's performance, so it's not just a pure numbers game. So I think we very much take that into account, and hopefully Jane will vouch for that in terms of her experience in terms of training. So we do encourage, flexible working, so that covers a broad spectrum. So you can train as a part-time inspector, and as I said, we will try and sort of tailor our kind of assessment of your progression to have due regard to that, and we'll kind of focus on the individual. Is there anything that anybody else wants to come in on that point before we move on to the next one?
If I come in quickly there, Bev.
Yep.
Yeah, if it helps. I mean, when I started as an inspector, I was pregnant. So I did my initial, part 1 training. Then I went off on maternity leave and came back and did the rest of the training later on. So it took me a little bit longer than my cohort to progress. But, again, it was all fitted around my my own circumstances. And I did, carry on and progress through. So, yeah, very, very much, we are flexible around that. And a little bit later when I got back from maternity leave, I did 80%, but my pattern was different to Jane's. It was I worked 3 weeks on and 1 week off, for example. So there are lots of different ways that we can accommodate that flexible work to depending on your own circumstances. And in terms of training as well, you will get there. It's just that it might take a little bit longer, and we'll adapt to your particular circumstances.
Thanks, Rebecca. Okay, so the next question is about progression. So asking, is there a clear path to progression beyond Band 1, and if so, what does it look like? I don't know whether, Graham, is this one that you're best placed to answer, if you don't mind?
Always happy to pick anything up. I think it's probably worth thinking about progression in multiple ways. So there is the progression in the sense of promotion and different job opportunities. And there's multiple paths that people can choose in that respect. So, for example, you could just decide to go for what you might think of as straightforward promotion, band 1, band 2, band 3, up to the most senior levels of kind of inspectors handling casework. But then there's also alternative different progression pathways available as well. So, for example, you could decide to learn about different types of casework. I've referenced that earlier on. So you could ask if you could learn about national infrastructure and move into infrastructure, or local plans and move into local plans, or handle compulsory purchase orders, or some of the other weird and wonderful work that we handle. Or there's a whole load of other career pathways available to you, again through application and through development with your line manager, around things like, for example, being an inspector manager, which is what we call the people who lead the teams of inspectors, so like an inspector team leader. Or you could decide that you might like to coach some of our planning apprentices or our appeal planning officers who are at a level, if you like, below an inspector, but working on their way to being chartered. Or we have some inspectors in leadership positions. So some of our operations teams are run by inspectors who have decided they'd like to develop in a different way and learn more about leadership and management, and then go back into doing casework maybe. Or even there's people like Rebecca, who was on a few moments ago. So Rebecca's been a band 3 planning inspector and is now one of our professional leads. So Rebecca doesn't handle casework anymore, but has a really important role around professional standards, around training, around liaison with the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, external stakeholder engagement, and that kind of work. So there's no single clear path. There are multiple paths available to you, and indeed, once you're on one path, you can change direction and go on another path if you wish. So there's probably no single kind of this is what an inspector career path looks like. You can do all sorts of things. And don't forget, you could always work for us, go back out into industry and come back again as well. So there's no reason why you have to stay with the inspectorate on one career path forever. That's probably it, Bev.
Thank you, Graham. Yeah, I mean, just to add to that point, I mean, if I think back to my cohorts, I think there was 12 of us. And when I think about what we're all doing now and what different bands, we've got band 1, band 2, band 3, we've got local plans inspectors, we've got enforcement inspectors, we've got national infrastructure, so that just shows that we all come in at the same time, but people go off in different directions. And also the thing that Graham said, you can try something, and if maybe you decide it's not for you, then you can try something else. There's lots of different opportunities available. So so the path doesn't look the same for everyone. I think that's the point, isn't it? We don't have a clear pathway in the sense of it looks the same and it's the same progression. It can look different for everyone. Okay, so the next question is about, would you be expected to progress to hearings or inquiries, or do inspectors stay with written reps only? So I mean, I can kind of initially answer this, and if anyone wants to chip in, but in terms of your initial training, then you will be trained in written reps cases. So you won't be expected to do hearings or inquiries during your initial training period. And we don't do hearings training as part of the initial training. So that would be something that would come afterwards. Now, I'm not sure whether this question is asked in the sense if someone is not keen to do hearings and inquiries and is wondering whether you can only deal with written reps. I suspect you probably could. As a band 1 inspector, if you really didn't want to deal with hearings, then I suspect there probably is a path that you could just deal with written reps. In terms of, and maybe Graham or Rebecca could come in on that and clarify that if needs be, but in terms of hearings, then generally speaking now we offer that once the inspectors have kind of gone through their initial training period, then it's really on a sort of business need basis. So if we need more inspectors trained in hearings, then we will do hearings training, and people can put themselves forward for that with the agreement of their managers, and they would be trained in hearings, and then they would start to deal with hearings cases as well as written reps. And we do have band 1 level hearings, so that would be casework that band 1 inspectors would deal with. In terms of inquiries, again, that's specialist training. So generally speaking, most inquiry casework is higher than band 1 level. So you do get band 1 inspectors that are inquiry trained that do inquiries, but generally speaking, they're working above band when they're doing those inquiries. So I don't know if there's anything that Rebecca or Graham or anyone else wanted to add at that point, or whether I've covered the points that we need to make in response to that one. Rebecca?
Yeah, I just agree with that, Bev. We do have inspectors that just do written representations, you know, for whatever reason they haven't wanted to do hearings and inquiries, and it is obviously an option, but certainly, you know, you don't have to do it. It's an opportunity to work above band, for example, if you're doing inquiries. So that's again not something we would expect from a band one inspector, you know, at the off really. So yeah, just confirming what you said is correct.
Okay, great, thank you. So the next question is about the length of the initial training period, and there's a few sort of HR related ones. So maybe Esther, if I can come to you in a little bit and maybe you can clarify some things on that. So in terms of the initial training period, then we generally say around about 12 months, but again, it's not fixed. So some people will progress through it quicker than 12 months, some people will take longer, but you're looking at roughly around that time. And as we've talked about, if you're working part-time, then there might be a chance that you're going to take longer because you just need time to deal with more cases because you're working part-time. And in terms of the starting salary, as it's subject to review. Now, I'm not sure whether this means in terms of, you know, sort of the usual annual increase or whether you get increments whilst you're in training. Now, there is a sort of point throughout training where once you meet a particular milestone, then you automatically get a pay rise at that point. And again, that time scale will vary on the individual depending on when they hit that milestone. And maybe Esther, I don't know whether you can clarify that. And then the other point about able to carry over local government leave entitlement, I don't think you can, but again, maybe Esther can. Yeah, so Graham's shaking his head. So yeah, you can't carry over any leave entitlement. So you would start at the same point when everyone enters the planning inspection, they will start on the same leave entitlement. And then in terms of the written exercise, asking would it be reviewed by the final interview panel, again, Esther can maybe clarify, but my understanding is that it wouldn't necessarily be the interview panel that mark your written assessment. It could be a different set of people or a different individual than the one that will actually interview. But maybe, Esther, if you're happy to come in and just clarify any of those points if needs be.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, with regard to carrying over the holiday, no, we can't, and that's because we only recognise civil service as continuous service, and local government is classed as a public service, which is different. In terms of the panels, we do try to keep the panels consistent throughout the exercise, but that's not always possible due to sort of time constraints, the number of panel members that that we actually need to be able to conduct the campaign. So it may be, but not necessarily. But after each part of the process, there is a validation exercise with all of the panel members, so that the scoring, etc., is consistent. Sorry, was there another one that you wanted me to come in on as well?
No, I think we clarified the bit about the leave,
Okay.
didn't we? Yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And then the next question is a more general one, really. Which kind of practical skills and previous job experience are ideal for the planning inspector role? So I'll probably call on maybe Graham or Rebecca to come in on this one. But I mean, the first point is to say, look at the information pack, because that's really detailed about the types of skills and experience that we'd be looking for that would make you kind of best placed really to kind of be a good fit for the role. But in terms of presentation, you've heard that people come from a wide range of backgrounds, so it's not a kind of one size fits all really. You know, you can come from a broad range of backgrounds and still provide us with the right kind of skills and experience that we're looking for. Yeah, so Rebecca, I think you're going to come in at this point.
Yeah, Graham, I want to add, so for example, it's not the case that you have to have a background in local government working in development management, for example. You know, I didn't come through that route, although I did a short time in development management much earlier on in my career. I'd worked for a regeneration agency, and actually, you know, the job I had before joining the inspectorate was at the Royal Town Planning Institute as a policy advisor. So, you know, a very different route. Yes, we do have those who have come through that direct, you know, development management route, but we have a lot of different backgrounds as well, ecologists and some others who have come from a legal background, perhaps working as a, you know, a legal advisor in a local government, for example. So we do have a variety. And Graham, I don't know if you want to pick up, because your own background was with a local authority, wasn't it?
Yeah, I came from a local government background, but if I look at the groups of people coming into the organisation in the last couple of cohorts, for example, yes, there have been people from local government, a variety of backgrounds. We've also had people from the third sector and also from different elements of the private sector as well, and they all bring different skills and experience. But the core that we really need, the bit that makes the difference between will you make a good inspector and how can we develop you and support you, is about that ability to analyze information, the complex information, see the wood from the trees, interpret it and apply policy. So there's a series of criteria in the pack to take a look at, but we're not looking for specific bits of experience from specific sectors. We're looking for those generic skills and experience and competencies that go across sectors, across professions. We can support you with the planning knowledge you need if you need more support on that. It's the generic skills which make the difference between whether someone becomes a planning inspector or not. So it's about things like writing clearly, accurately, concisely, about analysing the information, about applying policies, that kind of background.
Great, thank you both. Okay, so the next one again is talking about site visits and travel days, which I think we covered on the previous kind of discussion about that. So again, just to emphasise that the way it works is that, you know, the case officers will look at where you live, they'll look at where the cases are, they will try where possible to match those two things together. But as we've said, there are occasions when we just can't do that, so you will need to travel a little bit further afield. Okay, so the next question is about someone's got a local government pension and asking whether you can transfer it easily to the civil service pension. I mean, maybe Esther, this is something you can clarify and come in on, but yeah, I mean, that was my position when I joined, and I found it a very easy process just to fill out the paperwork and just transfer any previous contributions that you have over into the civil service pension scheme. Esther, I don't know if there's anything that you want to add on that.
I was just going to say there's a pensions helpline which people can obviously get some guidance from the specialists about that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, and then the last question that we've got on the Q&A, I mean, we've got just under 10 minutes left, so if anybody wants to ask anything else, then get something typed in there. So it's a question about caseload, a typical caseload per week or month for a band 1. I think it was going to say planning inspector. So just in terms of training, so for a full-time inspector in training, then you'll start, at the moment, you'll start on 2 cases a week. So that would be a typical kind of starting caseload. And as you've heard from some of the inspectors in training, depending on where those cases are or people's working patterns, sometimes people work across a fortnightly programme, so that might be 4 cases per 2 weeks. Or if you've got some travel time, that might get reduced to 3 cases across the 2 weeks. Now, after a period of about 5 or 6 months, depending on how you're progressing, once you've done your second element of your training, the caseload typically for a full-time inspector goes up to 3 cases per week. And that's the equivalent caseload that Band 1 inspectors out of training also have. So that's the typical caseload that you're looking at. And for some people that are working outside of the Planning Inspectorate, who are probably dealing with like hundreds of planning applications or hundreds of, you know, cases with clients, you probably think, well, that doesn't sound like very much. But I think that's just evidence and symptomatic of how it differs. You know, the amount of work that you put into each case differs. So I think the workload is reflective of that. And certainly, in my experience, again, one of the big positives of the Planning Inspectorate is the caseload that you are allocated is a manageable caseload. And again, it might be worth if Jane or Claire wants to come in at this point and just give your experience of that. But certainly, I think the experience that I had previous to the Planning Inspectorate, and I think the experience that a lot of our recent kind of cohorts have had, is they've come from organisations where they have unmanageable caseload and unmanageable workload. And certainly, in my experience, that's not what you get at the Planning Inspectorate. The caseload that you're allocated is perfectly doable in the time that you're given to do it. Claire, I don't know if you want to pop in yet.
Yeah, I think just to echo that, really, you as you say, you start off on the 2 after you've had your initial training. I think something that Jade mentioned in the previous session, which I think was really useful to know as well, is whilst the first year to 18 months is called a training period,
once you've completed your first 2 weeks training in Bristol, you're dealing with live cases and you are issuing decisions yourself. So you're responsible for the site visits, for looking at all the evidence and for writing the decision. So whilst it's a training period and you're fully supported by seconded inspector trainers, you have someone who'll look after you and guide you through, and obviously you get feedback on all of your decisions before they get issued. You are actually dealing with live decisions. So in terms of the caseload, yes, 2 a week when you first start off, and then that goes up to 3. It can feel, after you've had your second lot of training on issues like green belt and more specialist appeals against conditions, etc. It can feel a bit of a panic when you step up, but actually it's really manageable in terms of how you can manage your week. I would say you have around about a day per case to write up your decision when you've got 3 a week. And also, if you do get backed up, if you get maybe a more complicated case that takes longer, you can work with your SIT, and often if you get yourself in a situation, they can juggle your cases around as well to give you more time. So you are supported, you're never left on your own feeling overwhelmed. And I think when I've spoken to people who have local authority backgrounds, it's just like night and day in terms of the level of workload that you're having to get through. And that workload, I think as well, it was mentioned last time, if you go on leave, you're not allocated any cases during that time. If you work part-time, that's adjusted. So it's always a manageable caseload. There's not a big stack waiting for you when you come back from leave, for example.
Thanks, Claire, that's really useful. Okay, we'll just quickly whiz through these because we're running out of time. So one question is about IT support. So you get, as part of your initial induction, you get IT training provided then, and then we've always got an online kind of help desk. So there's always IT support available if you need it. And then we've got a question about age range within the current Band 1 planning inspectors. Now, before you start, Graham, I think, when I started at PINS, I was like, I had this vision of, men in grey suits who were ex-chief planning officers, and it wasn't like that when I joined, and it's certainly not like that now, is it? So I don't know whether you want to come in and clarify that.
You're right. No, it's certainly not like that. So I can't give you an accurate age because it changes all the time. But we have had some Band 1 planning inspectors who are in their 20s, and I'm not sure whether they've tipped over into their 30s now, but there are some who are certainly in that age range. And the oldest one, I think, is 73 at the moment, round about there. And that's one of the joys of the flexible working that we've referred to before, is that actually you can gradually reduce your hours as well. So one of the things that you do find inspectors doing is as they get towards an age where they might like to reduce their hours, they can do, and you can still keep doing interesting work. So although I'd want to retire before I'm 73, there are some who are very happy carrying on and get an awful lot out of it from carrying on into their later years.
Fab, thank you. And I think, that again is kind of just evidence of the, it's a broad church, isn't it? It's such a broad spectrum of people that are planning inspectors, and it's not always what you typically think of as a planning inspector. And I was guilty of that as well, pre coming to the inspectorate. So yeah, I think, we've kind of come to the end of the session, really. There is another question about pensions, but hopefully I think maybe if Sarah or Esther can just post the details on the chat to that. I think it's just a contact. Yeah, so it's been put on there now. Okay, so I don't know whether, Graham, you want to kind of just finish up with any words just before we finish?
I'd just like to say thank you to Bev and Rebecca and Funke and everyone else who's contributed. Thank you, those of you who have joined us as attendees. Hope you've got the questions and answers that you need. If you do have any more questions, then there's an email address right at the top of the chat exchange, and it's in the pack. It's pins.recruitment@ or something like that. Please do drop us a line if you've got any more questions, and please also feedback to us about whether you found this useful and if there are things that we could have covered which would have been good for you. Please get your applications in. We hope to hear from you soon, and good luck.